Hello everyone, Persephone here, and welcome back to the Storyteller's Corner, episode 16. And today, we're going to have another mini-series, like with the Jungle Book. Let me just get the post going, so that way people know that I'm live streaming. Sorry. And there. So, I put a warning in the description. I'm going to give you another verbal warning, just in case. The commentary in regards to today's fairy tale is going to be a little different, and I am probably going to say some things that are going to upset some people. Just letting you know that first and foremost, but you know what? Considering the context of this fairy tale and the context of some of these adaptations, I gotta be honest. And again, I'd rather speak the truth and lose followers than tell a lie and have 1 million followers. So, that being said, warning in the description. I've given you another warning. You've been warned. So, yeah. Now, when have I not talked about Disney on this channel? I mean, it's kind of hard not to talk about Disney on this channel, considering that I read fairy tales, and especially given that back in the day when 2D animation was just starting out, Disney took several fairy tales and adapted them for the big screen. The Brothers Grimm, Charles Perrault, Hans Christian Andersen, even Rudyard Kipling had stories that inspired him. And Disney gave these stories a unique, creative twist, making these characters charming and lovable, but still maintaining to these stories that we know and love, just giving them a new look and a more kid-friendlier taste, which is understandable because some of the fairy tales that I have read on here are very dark and very thematic. And for good reason, because as I've said before on this channel, back when fairy tales were made, quote unquote, they were made by adults for adults. And they still maintained morals that children could learn from. But yeah, very thematic elements in the original fairy tales. We have Cinderella's stepsisters cutting off parts of their feet so they can fit it into the slipper. We have Snow White murdered not once, not twice, but 3 times. First with a corset, second with a poisoned comb, and then third with a titular poisoned apple. These original stories are dark, and the story I'm going to read is no exception. So, let's talk about Pinocchio. As I mentioned before, back in the day when animation was in its golden age, Disney took the story of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi and adapted it for film. While Disney did tone down the thematic elements tremendously, he still maintained the morals of the original story and still maintained the characters and morals, just giving them a more creative twist. And again, toning down the thematic elements a little bit, but still maintaining them and making it a bit more easier to swallow for kids. Now, like many people, as I've said before, I grew up on a lot of Disney films. Hello, how are you doing on this lovely day? Hi, Andre Gibson. I am doing great. I am ready to read Pinocchio, and I'm just getting into the commentary, which I put a warning in the description, and I said a warning. I'm going to say things that are probably going to upset some people. But when have I ever shied away from that? But anyway, as I said before, like many people, I grew up watching all the classic animated Disney films, and they are very near and dear to my heart. When I was in 8th grade, I saw Maleficent. And I thought it was okay. It was interesting. It was a passable film that technically didn't really need to exist because I liked Maleficent just fine as the mistress of all evil. However, I found it interesting that they were telling the story from a different point of view through with Maleficent as the titular character, and I also found it interesting that they explored found family and familial love rather than the love of a couple. I found that to be extremely interesting, and heck, it was even through Maleficent that I learned that iron burned fairies, because back then, when I was in 8th grade, I wasn't as big of a monster buff and fairy tale addict as I was now. I still read them, but I wasn't fully well versed in monsters and their species. So I learned something from that film. I thought it was interesting. It was passable. It didn't need to exist, but what it did well, and at least it was trying to be creative. And then we got Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin, and Mulan, and The Lion King, and Cinderella, and The Jungle Book. All live action remakes, and clearly the passable, interesting charm that Maleficent had was not applied to the rest of these live action films. And now I know what some of you are going to be saying. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Persephone, we get it. You hate the Disney live action remakes with a passion. If it's such a subject that makes you so mad, then why do you talk about it? And to that, I can tell you this. My first really big issue is the wasted potential. Because all of these films could have been great. They could have been passable like Maleficent, or heck, they could have even been good. But that's only if they had applied the effort to it. If you want to grow up with your audience, that is fine. And I mean, I saw in reviews of Mulan that they tried doing that. They tried growing up with the audience. But again, they keep missing the target. And again, if you want to grow up with your audience, that is fine. More power to you. But you got to put some effort into it. Be creative. You want to grow up with the audience? Tell us these stories and stick to the original source material. Show me Red Riding Hood being devoured by the wolf. Show me Cinderella's stepsisters getting their eyes picked out by birds. Show me Snow White's ribs being crushed by a corset. That's one way that you can grow up with your audience. And these characters, the original characters in these live action remakes are remade and revamped to be perfect. They have no flaws and little to no personality, which that doesn't make for a relatable character, because people aren't perfect. We make mistakes. We screw up. We feel negative emotions. And again, it just bothers me. The wasted potential. And here's the thing. In Aladdin, they do that movie especially dirty, because at the end credits, they have everyone dancing and having a good time with heavy Bollywood aesthetic and themes. And as Nostalgia Critic put it, because I'd seen his review of Aladdin, that's what the film could have been. You could have taken the story of Aladdin and added the thematic, wonderful colorfulness of Bollywood dramas. But no. The one thing Disney is barely good at is barely good at being creative. Exactly. And here's the thing. We get these live action remakes. They are horrible, awful. They lack no creativity, and they completely backhand the morals of the original stories. And then Disney gives us Encanto, which is an animated film that is creative beyond words and actually has a decent moral to it. And that is the biggest insult to me, is that Disney gives us these live action remakes and then they give us Encanto. And that is just further proof. Like, with Encanto, it's like, Disney, you are better than this. And you know that you are better than this. That is one of my big reasons. And then, of course, the second reason is they are completely upending these characters and going against the story stories and trying to fix what isn't broken. Sorry, I'm late. No problem, Matt. I'm just getting into the commentary, which again, I'm probably gonna upset some people with all the stuff I'm saying right now. And just wait till I start talking about Pinocchio, because I'm gonna upset a lot of people. Probably, but again, I'm being honest, and when have I ever shied away from disturbing the normal? But yeah, these live action remakes take these beloved characters that are charming and unique, and they attempt to fix them. Again, I say fix with the air quotations, because here's the thing. These characters are flawed, but they are relatable, and in ways we can relate to them, despite the fact that it's a work of fiction. These new main characters in all these live action Disney films are made bland, or they are made so pitch perfect that they have no room to have flaws or make mistakes or be relatable. They are just perfect, no improvement needed. And I said it before, that is not a relatable character. Take for example the upcoming Little Mermaid and upcoming Snow White movies. Yes, those are real. They are coming out, and yes, they also backhand the original characters in the original morals, as Snow White and Ariel are now being remade to being strong, independent women who don't need men or love in their lives. And I've said before that The Little Mermaid is near and dear to my heart, but like, here's the thing. Ariel is flawed. She's young. She's 16 years old. When you're 16 years old, you aren't a full adult. You're not entirely a child, but you're not an adult either. You are growing and slowly becoming an adult. And she makes mistakes. And there goes my speakers. Welcome to the live stream, where anything that can go wrong will go wrong, because that is just the way it is. There we go. Okay, have that ready in case it starts fizzing. But yeah, Ariel made some mistakes. Talking about modern Disney failures, my favorite example is the modern Aladdin, where Jasmine sings a song about being independent, but it's practically right before she gets kidnapped. I saw the review of that, and yes, just again, Disney completely going against the morals. But here's the thing with Ariel. Yes, she makes mistakes. She makes a deal with a shady sea witch. But here's the thing. Love isn't what sparks her to go up to the surface realm. At least not a love for the prince. Before we even see her and Prince Eric interact, we already see that she is passionate about human culture. She is curious about us and what life is like up on land. She literally collects human trinkets from shipwrecks. She has a love for knowledge and for humanity, and she wants to learn more about it. And Prince Eric just further inspires her to want to go on land. She's not doing it for him in the beginning. In all honesty, Prince Eric is icing on the cake and gives her more incentive to want to be on land with the people. And here's the thing with Snow White. Snow White, also 16 years old, and she runs into the forest frightened for her life because a huntsman spares her and tells her that her stepmother wants to kill her just because she is prettier. Think about this for a second. If you were running from your life into strange, uncharted land, nowhere to go, only knowing that someone is out after you and wanting to kill you, how would you react? I think you'd be frightened. I think you'd be scared. Because despite the fact that death is just another part of life, everyone is frightened of their own mortality. And when she enters the dwarfs dwarf's house, and they find her sleeping there. She begs them. It's like, please don't send me away. If you do, she'll kill me. And here's the thing. They let her stay in exchange for her keeping the house and cooking and cleaning and taking care of it, which she does so. She earns her stay there. And again, she's 16 years old, but she is also the epitome. I would be terrified. Exactly, Andre. No one would be thinking straight in that scenario. You would literally be in the fight or flight, in this case flight, just trying to survive. But anyway, as I was saying before about Snow White, she's 16. She's also a young woman, not entirely a child, but not a full adult yet. And she is also the epitome of being beautiful inside as well as out. And that is one of the things about her, is not only is she pretty physically, but inside she is also pretty, as she is kind and she is compassionate. She is hardworking and she's innocent. She's extremely innocent. But of course, these live action Disney remakes feel the need to make her strong and independent and in need and without a need for love, which is also a big shake my head, like, why Disney? Because here's the thing. Love has its place in the world, just like everything does. And I know this is ironic, considering what I said in my last live stream. It's like, why are you talking about love? Aren't you staying out of it? And yeah, I am, but just because I am not currently seeking romance right now doesn't mean that I am giving the middle finger and saying that, oh, love is a lie, love doesn't exist or whatever, because love does exist and it does have its place in the world. And if it wasn't for love, then Snow White would still be in that coffin under the influence of Sleeping Death. Sleeping Beauty would also be sleeping forever. Cinderella would have had her one night out at the ball, but then she would have gone back to being abused by her stepfamily. And if love didn't exist, more people could just grow a brain. This day and age, brains are in hard supply. I actually found a German quote, where it says, "Dear God, please throw some brains down from heaven." Or if brains are in short supply, then rocks would be also appreciated. But yeah, if love didn't exist, then the beast would have stayed a beast forever. Love does have its place in the world, but these Disney live action remakes do not want to see any of that. And it's not just the love between couples. There's several words for love in Greek. We have eros, the sexual passionate love. Philos, I think, or philo, the friendship love between friends, because friends can love each other without being sexual. Prime example of this, the Lord of the Rings, Sam and Frodo, excellent examples. And then of course there's agape. Gravity works anyway. But then there's agape, which is the familial love. So yeah, love does have its place in the world. And again, taking what's broken, or taking what's not broken and attempting to fix it. That is another one of the reasons why I have this. And this brings me to Disney's latest live action remake, which is, of course, Pinocchio. Now, here's the thing. When I saw the trailer for Pinocchio, I saw it. It looked good. And I said, okay, I'll bite. This has potential. This has a poppy seed sized grain of potential, provided that they actually be creative with the story. And why did you lose it? I still have a brain. I just dodged a bullet. And anyway, but when I saw Pinocchio, I thought it looked good. I thought, okay, this has a poppy seed worth of hope, provided that they actually stick to the original story and they tell the story of Pinocchio in a unique and creative way. Then I see reviews for the film come out, and that little tiny grain of poppy seed was thrown into the fires and burnt into a useless cinder. Because not only does Disney's live-action remake of Pinocchio completely miss the point of the original story, but it also throws the morals aside completely. And we're given a very poor film that misses the point. I love pointing out how off the bat Pinocchio is a well-behaved boy throughout the whole movie. It's almost like he never needed a cricket. Exactly. That's one of the big reasons why Pinocchio, the live-action remake, does not work. Is because Pinocchio is a Gary Stu. He is a perfect individual who is good from the moment he is made, and he does not need a conscience. And he doesn't need to, not only does he need a conscience, but he doesn't even need to be coerced by the talking fox and the talking cat to go into the theater. Because he chooses to go to the theater. Because the school wouldn't let him go to school and learn. He had no other choice. Right? The cricket barely did anything. Exactly. Jiminy is not needed because Pinocchio is perfect and he doesn't need the coercion. He willingly goes to Stromboli because what else was he gonna do? The school wouldn't let him learn. And then, of course, there's the titular lying scene where Pinocchio's nose grows. In the animated film, this was one of the morals, where he tells lies to the Blue Fairy in an attempt to avoid getting out of trouble. You're also constantly screaming the N-word and slurs was extremely homophobic and rude to all of your ex's friends because they were his friends. I never said the N-word. Anyway, but Pinocchio is no longer a relatable character in the live-action remake. Because he is completely perfect and he doesn't make mistakes. He doesn't even need to be coerced to go into Pleasure Island. Because again, he's perfect. He doesn't make mistakes that would require him having flaws and being an actual character. Instead, he's scooped up to Pleasure Island and he doesn't even partake in any of the temptations. Another problem I have with the film is also that another problem I also have with the film is that Stromboli is eventually arrested later on in the film, which goes against the morals because the original animated film, the characters weren't punished, and this was a good way of saying that these threats are still out there. So sharp. And then there's Pleasure Island, which I saved the worst for last. Because Pleasure Island was done the worst. In the original film, Pleasure Island is where kids go to run amok, where they drink, they smoke, they break things, and they get into fights to the point where they get black eyes. There could have been no conflict if Tom Hanks brought him to school rather than let him walk alone through the town. That's the only reason Pinocchio went on an adventure in the movie. Yeah. Again, there are multiple ways that they could have done the story, but they just chose to retell it word for word and just make Pinocchio absolutely perfect. And again, as I was saying with Pleasure Island, it's a place where kids go to do things that they're not supposed to do, like drinking, smoking, breaking things. And because of this, and because they give in to these temptations and they do things that they know that they're not supposed to do, they turn into donkeys, and then the coachman sells them to the salt mines. It's a horrific thing. and a horrible scene, but it drives home the moral of actions having consequences. And also what happens if you do things like that, especially as a kid. The Pleasure Island in the live-action remake, Pleasure Island in the new Pinocchio was more weird than scary. Well, here's the thing. The Pleasure Island in the new Pinocchio does not have smoking or drinking. It doesn't have things that kids aren't supposed to do. The only thing they kept was the breaking of things. And again, even then, Pinocchio doesn't partake in any of that. Instead of smoking cigars and drinking beer, they have root beer and candy and carnival rides and things kids generally like. They even have a platform where kids can hold up these signs saying things like, "Oh, you're ugly, shut up, you're stupid," and they can scream at the top of their lungs, which again is something kids do. And if you say that you never did that as a kid, I am going to press F for doubt upon that. Because, I mean, I did that as a kid. I was a horrible kid. And if I knew half of the things then that I knew now, I'd probably be a lot more of a different person. But here's the thing. By essentially making Pleasure Island in the new live-action remake something full of things that kids like, these kids are still punished and are still turned into donkeys and sold to the salt mine, essentially being punished for being little kids. And even Pinocchio, who, when he is brought to Pleasure Island, does not partake in any of the temptations, only really drinking root beer. Even Pinocchio still gets partially turned into a donkey, despite the fact that he did not partake in any of the temptations. Again, essentially being punished for being a little kid. That is messed up when you think about it, don't you think? Now look, here's the thing. It is one thing to discipline a child when they are doing things that they're not supposed to do, like smoking or drinking cigars, breaking things, or telling lies, which of course, in the live-action remake, Pinocchio uses his lies and his long nose to escape, essentially backhanding that moral. But again, it's one thing for a parent to discipline their child when they're doing things that they're not supposed to do, breaking things, smoking, drinking, telling lies, to name a few, because a good parent, a proper parent, loves their child and wants them to learn from their mistake in the safety of the home, surrounded by people who love them, rather than have that kid go out into the real world and learn that lesson the hard way. Because the real world will knock you flat on your rear and it won't give you a second thought. But punishing a kid just for being a kid? No, there's a word for that. And it's not good. So you have that big middle finger to the original story. Because again, these kids were doing things that they weren't supposed to do, and they were punished for it justly. Was it an extreme punishment? Of course. It was horribly extreme. But then again, these kids were allowed to do extreme things that they weren't supposed to do. And then, of course, they're drinking root beer? How horrible! Children partaking in completely harmless and normal things. What's next? They're going to enjoy a carnival? Lesson is don't go to Disneyland, apparently. Yeah, Matt. Kind of, yeah. But then you have that big middle finger to the original morals and the lessons of the story. And then, of course, the ending. Pinocchio doesn't even turn into a real boy at the end. They literally say, "Oh, did he? Did he not? Not who's to say? Maybe the real boy." Disney is basically saying, don't go to their parks. I mean, I used to want to go as a little kid, but now, I could spend that money on better things, like books. and sushi. But yeah, they just give the old, did he? Maybe the real boy was the friend we made along the way. Universal Studios is where it's at for me. I don't know. But yeah, by giving us that ending, they once again go completely against the original story and the original morals of the original book by Carlo Collodi. Because that was the whole point of the original story. Pinocchio was a flawed, naive, wooden little boy who made mistakes, constant mistakes in the original animated film. But he grew from these mistakes, and as he grew, he matured, and he eventually earned his humanity. He earned that gift to be a real boy. But once again, these live-action Disney remakes just have to go against all the morals. And if you think about it, they're actually these Disney live-action remakes are quite similar to the devil himself. Because the devil can't create anything new. It's impossible for him to do so. Instead, what he does is he takes things that have already been created and he bends them. He twists them in poor mimicry of creation. And that is what Disney is doing with these classic animated films. Taking them and twisting them to suit their agenda and their ideals because they themselves cannot create anything new to suit their ideals. Now, I know what some of you are thinking now. It's like, Avery, Persephone, what does all this have to do with the price of a conscience in Italy? And I say that because, and the answer is, it's because I'm going to be reading you the original story by Carlo Collodi. Which, give Walt Disney some credit, he toned down the thematic elements tremendously, but he still maintained them because the original story is thematic. It is dark. I am talking about murder, attempted murder, lying, threats of violence, the works. Now, the story of Pinocchio is a moderate read, clocking in at around 36 chapters, at least in this version. Yes! Horrible wedding child time! Yes, indeed, Matt. Speaking of which, can you hear me? I'm not getting the little green dots on my screen, but you guys can all still hear me, right? I just want to make sure that I can be heard before I go on. So once I get an answer, just want to make sure I can be heard, is all. But yeah, the story of Pinocchio is a moderate read, clocking in at 36 chapters total. I can, you're good. Okay, good. That's what I wanted to hear. But yeah, I could technically read you the entire story, but if I did, we'd be here all day. And so, like I did with the Jungle Book and the 3 stories that make up Mowgli's entire story, I'm going to divide the story of Pinocchio into 3 parts, with parts 1 and 2 consisting of 12 chapters each. And then the third part consisting of the remaining chapters of the story to make it a bit more easier to digest, so to speak. And now, I got this book from a used bookstore, and I enjoyed the story. It was certainly more messed up than I originally thought, but I'm glad that I read it. And if Disney had just stuck to the original story, they might have had a shot. Multi-part live streams return! What, Matt? Did you enjoy the Mowgli trilogy that much? Huh? I don't say that to be mean. I'm just saying that because I'm genuinely curious. But yeah, so to make it easier and also for the sake of my sanity, Pinocchio is going to be divided into 3 parts. So, and what I find interesting is that the original story by Carlo Collodi ended on a very bitter ending. But people love the character so much that that Carlo Collodi eventually wrote the rest of the story to give us a happy ending. So, without further ado, this is Pinocchio. Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. Chapter 1. Once upon a time there was a king, my little readers will say at once. No, children, you're wrong. Once upon a time there was a piece of wood. Ooh. Yes, indeed, Matt. Here we go. It wasn't a fancy piece of wood, just a regular wood pile log, the kind you might put in your stove or fireplace to stoke a fire and heat your room. I don't know how it happened, but the fact is that one fine day, this piece of wood turned up in the woodshop of an old carpenter, Master Antonio by name, though everyone called him Master Cherry, on account of the tip of his nose, which was always shiny and purple, like a ripe cherry. Master Cherry was delighted to see that piece of wood. He rubbed his hands together with satisfaction and mumbled in a soft voice, "This log has turned up at a good moment. I'll use it to make me a table leg." Wasting no time, he picked up his sharp hatchet and started removing the log's bark and trimming it down. But just as he was about to strike the first blow, his arm froze in mid-air because he heard a little high-pitched voice pleading, "Don't hit me too hard!" Just imagine dear old Master Cherry's reaction. His bewildered eyes roamed the room to see where on earth that little voice had come from, but he didn't see anyone. He looked under his workbench. Nobody there. It's possessed! Well, it's not possessed per se. Just listen. He looked inside a cabinet he always kept shut. Nobody there. He looked in his basket of wood shavings and sawdust. Nobody there. He even opened his workshop door to take a look in the street. Nobody there. So what was going on? I see, he said then, laughing, and scratched his wig. Clearly I must have imagined that little voice myself. Now let's get back to work. And picking the hatchet up, he dealt the piece of wood a heavy blow. Ouch! You hurt me! Cried the same little voice bitterly. This time Master Cherry was struck dumb. His eyes bugged out of his head in fright. His mouth gaped and his tongue dangled down to his chin, like those grotesque faces carved on fountains. I wish I could chat, but in class, wish you luck. All right, Mitchell, the story will still be there. Okay, where to go? Carved on fountains. Okay. When he regained the use of speech, he said, trembling and stammering with fear, that little voice that said, ouch, where could it have come from? Because there is not a living soul in this place. Could this piece of wood have somehow learned to cry and complain like a little boy? I can't believe that. Look at this log. It's a piece of firewood like any other. If I threw it on the fire, I could bring a pot of beans to boil. So what's going on? Could someone be hidden inside it? If anyone's hiding in there, tough luck for him. I'll show him what's what. And as he grabbed that poor piece of wood with both hands and began whacking it mercilessly against the walls of the room, he then listened to see if he could hear the little voice complaining. He waited 2 minutes, and no voice. 5 minutes, and no voice. 10 minutes, and no voice. I see, he said then, forcing a laugh and ruffling his wig. Clearly I must have imagined it myself, that little voice that said, ouch. Now let's get back to work. And because by this point he was really quite afraid, he began humming to himself to screw up his courage. Meanwhile, leaving the hatchet aside, he picked up his plane, intending to scrape that piece of wood and make it smooth. But as he was planing back and forth, he heard the same little voice, which laughed and said, Stop it! You're tickling my tummy! This time poor Master Cherry fell down as if struck by lightning. When he opened his eyes again, he found himself sitting on the floor. His face seemed misshapen, and even the tip of his nose, which was nearly always purple, had turned bright blue with fright. Chapter 2. Just then there was a knock on his door. Come on in, said the carpenter, still too weak to stand. In walked a spry old man. His name was Geppetto, but the neighborhood kids, when they wanted to make him boil with rage, called him by the nickname Cornhead, since his yellow wig looked like a mound of cornmeal mush. That doesn't sound very appetizing. Geppetto had a terrible temper. Heaven help whoever called him Cornhead. He turned instantly into a wild animal, and there was no controlling him. "Good day, Master Antonio," said Geppetto. "What are you doing down there on the floor?" "I'm teaching the ants to count." "Well, good for you. What brings you to my shop, my dear Geppetto?" "My legs, actually, Master Antonio. I've come to ask a favor." "Here I am at your service," the carpenter replied, rising to his knees. "This morning an idea popped into my head." "Let's hear it." "I thought I'd make myself a nice wooden puppet. I mean a really amazing one that can dance and fence and do flips, and then I'd travel the world with it, earning my crust of bread and cup of wine as I went. What do you think?" "Good idea, Cornhead!" shouted that same little voice, seemingly out of nowhere. Hearing himself called Cornhead, Geppetto turned as red as a hot pepper, and approaching the carpenter, he said furiously, "Why are you insulting me?" "Who's insulting you?" "You called me Cornhead." "It wasn't me." "Oh, I suppose you're saying it was me? I say it was you. Was not, was true, was not, was true." As tempers flared, words gave way to deeds, and they scratched, bit, and battered each other as they fought. When the fight was over, Master Antonio found Geppetto's yellow wig in his hands, and Geppetto realized that he had had the carpenter's gray wig in his mouth. "Give me back my wig!" shouted Master Antonio. "And you give me mine back and we'll make peace." Returning each other's wigs, the two old men shook hands and swore to remain good friends for the rest of their lives. "So, dear Geppetto," said the carpenter as a peace offering, "what is that favor you wanted to ask?" "I'd like a little wood to make my puppet with. Will you give me some?" Master Antonio, quite happily, went straight to his workbench to fetch the piece of wood that had given him such a fright. But just as he was about to give it to his friend, the piece of wood gave a violent jerk, breaking free from his grasp, banged against the withered shins of poor Geppetto. "Oh, so that's how you present your gifts, is it? You've nearly crippled me. I swear it wasn't me." "Then I suppose it was me. It was that piece of wood that hit you." "I know it was the wood, but you're the one who threw it at my legs." "I didn't throw it." "Liar! Geppetto, don't insult me, or else I'll call you Cornhead." "Donkey! Cornhead! Jackass! Cornhead! Ugly ape! Cornhead!" On hearing himself called Cornhead for the third time, Geppetto flew into a blind rage and hurled himself upon the carpenter, and they went at each other tooth and nail. When the battle ended, Master Antonio had 2 more scratches on his nose, and Geppetto had fewer buttons on his vest. Having thus evened the score, they shook hands and swore to remain good friends for the rest of their lives. And so Geppetto took his nice piece of wood, thanked Master Antonio, and went hobbling home. Chapter 3. Geppetto lived in a small ground floor room, lit by a single window. The furnishings could not have been plainer. An old chair, a ramshackle bed, and a table that was falling apart. On the rear wall you could see a fireplace with a glowing fire, but it was a painted fire, and above it was a painted pot which boiled merrily and gave off steam that really looked like steam. As soon as he got home, Geppetto gathered his tools and got ready to carve and construct his puppet. "What name should I give him?" he said to himself. "I think I'll call him Pinocchio. That's a lucky name. I once knew an entire family by that name. The father was Pinocchio, the mother was Pinocchia, and the kids were all Pinocchio Juniors, and they got on just fine. The richest one was a beggar." Now that he had a name for his puppet, he set to work in earnest, carving the hair, then the forehead, then the eyes. Imagine his surprise when, as soon as the eyes were finished, he saw that they could move and were staring straight at him. Geppetto didn't like the way those eyes looked at him, and he said in an angry tone, "Wicked wooden eyes, why are you watching me?" No answer. Then after the eyes he made the nose, but no sooner was the nose finished than it started to grow, and it grew and grew and grew until in a few minutes it had become a huge, nearly endless nose. Poor Geppetto kept struggling to trim it back down to size, but the more he trimmed it down, the longer that impertinent nose became. After the nose, he made the mouth. Before the mouth was even finished, it had begun to laugh and mock him. "Stop laughing," said Geppetto, annoyed, but it was like talking to a wall. "I said stop laughing," he yelled in a threatening tone. The mouth stopped laughing, but stuck its tongue all the way out. Not wanting to damage his own handiwork, Geppetto pretended not to notice and kept on working. After the mouth, he carved the chin, the neck, the shoulders, the torso, the arms, and the hands. No sooner had he finished the hands than he felt his wig being snatched from his head. And what do you think he saw when he looked up? He saw his yellow wig in the puppet's hand. "Pinocchio, give me back my wig at once!" But Pinocchio, instead of giving the wig back, set it on his own head. He was half swallowed beneath it. This insolent, mocking behavior made Geppetto feel more miserable and wretched than he had ever felt in his life, and turning to Pinocchio, he said, "What a scamp of a son! You're not even finished yet, and already you're treating your father with disrespect. That's bad, my boy, bad." And he wiped a tear from his eye. The legs and feet were still left. When Geppetto finished making the feet, one of them kicked him in the nose. "I deserve it," he said to himself. "I should have known. Now it's too late." Then he lifted the puppet from under the arms and set him down on the ground so as to make him walk. Pinocchio's legs were stiff, and he didn't know how to move them, so Geppetto led him by the hand, teaching him to put one foot in front of the other. When his legs loosened up a bit, Pinocchio began to walk by himself, and then to run around the room until he slipped through the door, jumped into the street, and ran off. And there was poor Geppetto running after him, unable to catch him because the puppet was bounding like a rabbit. The clacking of wood feet on the pavement made quite a racket, like 20 pairs of farmer's clogs. Catch him, yelled Geppetto. But the people who were out in the street, seeing this wooden puppet running like a thoroughbred, stopped and watched him with delight. They laughed and laughed and laughed, not believing their eyes. Finally, unfortunately, a policeman appeared. Hearing all that clatter and thinking it was some colt that had slipped from its master's grip, he bravely planted his feet wide in the middle of the road and resolved to stop him and prevent further mayhem. When Pinocchio saw the policeman blocking the entire road up ahead of him, he figured he'd surprise him by running straight between his legs, but it didn't work. Without budging an inch, the policeman snatched him up by the nose. It was a prodigiously long nose, one that seemed specially designed to be easily seized by policemen. Yay, I have time to see how it's going. I love the necklace. Thanks, it's a magnifying glass pendant, so I can use it as a magnifying glass. But yes. So the policeman has just caught Pinocchio and grabbed him by the long nose. Which, I mean, if you have a nose that long, it's easy to grab. Also, I don't know why, but the green cute jacket just made me think of Squid Game. Well, it's actually a scarf. It's actually a scarf that I've just wrapped around. I thought it went fitting with my white shirt. All right, and delivered him back into Geppetto's arms. Geppetto's first impulse was to give him a good ear pulling and set him straight, but imagine his reaction when looking for Pinocchio's ears, he wasn't able to find them. And do you know why? Because in his haste to finish carving, he had forgotten to make them. So he grabbed Pinocchio by the nape of his neck and began to lead him back. Shaking his head menacingly, Geppetto said, "We're going home, and you can be sure we'll settle our accounts when we get there." And for those who don't know, the nape of the neck is basically the back. Like where my fingers are pinching. So the very back. Pinocchio understood his drift and threw himself to the ground, refusing to take another step. Meanwhile, the busybodies and the idlers began to gather into a crowd around them. They all had their opinions. "Poor puppet," some said. "Who can blame him for not wanting to go home? Just imagine how that mean Geppetto would thrash him." And the others added spitefully, "That Geppetto seems like a nice man, but he's a real bully with the boys. If they leave that poor puppet in his hands, he might as well bust him to pieces." In short, they made such a fuss that the policeman set Pinocchio free and took poor Geppetto straight to jail. Your voice is always very pleasing, calming. Well, thank you. I'm glad you're I try my best when reading these stories. To jail. At a loss for words to defend himself, Geppetto cried like a little calf, and on his way to jail he stammered and sobbed. Wicked child, and to think that I had worked so hard to make him a proper puppet. But it's my own fault. I should have known what to expect. What happened next is so strange you'll scarcely believe it, but I'll tell you all about it in the coming chapters. Chapter 4. You do your best, and it is the best. Well, thank you, Mitchell. I'm glad you think so. Chapter 4. What happened next, children, is that while poor innocent Geppetto was being led off to jail, that rascal Pinocchio, freed from the policeman's clutches, went sprinting across the fields to get home as fast as he could. Running crazily, he leapt over tall embankments, thorny hedges, and ditches full of water, much like a little goat or rabbit fleeing from hunters. When he got back home, the front door was ajar. He pushed it open and went inside, and as soon as he had bolted the door behind him, he plopped down on the floor with a great sigh of satisfaction. But his satisfaction didn't last long, as he heard someone in the room saying, "Cree, cree, cree." Funny how I'm reading a story about a werewolf, and that reminded me of your community post about a future ASMR video. Yeah, hers is next in the line right after I read part 1. I'll get to work on making her video. "Who's calling me?" said Pinocchio, quite alarmed. "I am." Pinocchio turned and saw a large cricket climbing slowly up the wall. "Tell me, Cricket, who might you be?" "I'm the talking cricket, and I've lived in this room for more than 100 years. "Well, it's my room now," said the puppet, "and if you'd like to do me a big favor, leave right now and don't look back." "I won't leave this place," replied the cricket, "until I've told you a great truth." "Tell me and make it quick." "Woe to any little boy who rebels against his parents and turns his back on his father's house. He will come to no good in this world, and sooner or later he'll be filled with bitter regret." "Sing on, dear Cricket, if it makes you happy, but the fact is I'm leaving this place tomorrow at the crack of dawn, because if I hang around the same thing that happens to all the other kids will happen to me too. I'll be sent to school, and I'll be expected to study whether I like it or not. And just between you and me, I have absolutely no desire to study. I'd much rather run around chasing butterflies and climbing trees and catching baby birds." "You poor little simpleton. Don't you know that if you do that, you'll grow up to be a real jackass and everyone will make fun of you?" "Hush, you gloom and doom cricket," yelled Pinocchio. But the cricket, who was patient and philosophical instead of taking offense at his rudeness, continued in the same tone. "And if going to school doesn't suit you, why don't you at least learn an honest trade so that you can put food on the table?" "You want to know why?" replied Pinocchio, who was starting to lose his patience. "Of all the trades in the world, there's only one that really suits me." "And what trade would that be?" "That of eating, drinking, sleeping, playing, and wandering wherever I like from sunup to sundown." "For your information," said the talking cricket, with his usual calm, "everyone who plies in that trade either ends up in a poorhouse or in prison." "Watch out, you gloom and doom cricket. If I snap, you'll be sorry." "Poor Pinocchio, I really feel sorry for you." "Why would you feel sorry for me?" "Because you're a puppet, and what's worse, you're a blockhead." At these last words, Pinocchio jumped in a rage, grabbed a small wooden mallet from the wood bench, and flung it at the talking cricket. Perhaps he didn't mean to hit him at all, but unfortunately he hit him square on the head, and with his last breath the poor cricket said, "Cree, cree, cree," and then he died on the spot, stuck to the wall. Chapter 5. Meanwhile, darkness had begun to fall, and Pinocchio, who hadn't had a thing to eat, noticed a faint grumbling in his stomach, which felt exactly like an appetite. But appetite in boys grows quickly, and sure enough, after a few minutes, his appetite had turned into hunger, and then suddenly it was a wolf-like hunger, a hunger you could have cut with a knife. Poor Pinocchio ran quickly toward the pot that was boiling on the fire, and reached out to remove the lid to see what was inside, but the pot was painted on the wall. Just imagine how he felt. His nose, which was already long, grew at least 4 inches longer. At this point, he began to run around the room and rifle through every drawer, every nook and cranny, searching for a little bread, even stale bread, a crust, a dog's bone, a little moldy corn mush, a fish skeleton, a cherry pit, in short, anything he could chew on. But he found nothing, a big, fat nothing, nothing at all. And meanwhile, poor Pinocchio's hunger kept growing and growing. His only relief was yawning, and he yawned so wide that the corner of his mouth met his ears. And after yawning, he would spit, and it felt as though he were spitting out his stomach. Losing hope, he wept and said, "The talking cricket was right. I was wrong to rebel against my daddy and to run away from home. If my daddy was here, I wouldn't be yawning to death now. Oh, what a terrible sickness hunger is!" Just then, he thought he glimpsed atop a heap of sweepings something roundish and white that looked very much like a chicken egg. He was up and on it in a single motion. It really was an egg. Words cannot describe the puppet's joy. You must imagine it yourself. Almost convinced it was a dream, he turned the egg over and over in his hand, touching it and kissing it. As he kissed it, he said, "Now how should I cook it? I know. I'll make an omelet. No, better to fry it up in a pan. Or maybe it would be tastier if I poached it. Or what if I boiled it instead? No, the quickest way is to fry it up in a pan. I can't wait any longer." Wasting no time, he set a small frying pan on a brazier that was full of live coals. Instead of oil or butter, he put a little water in the pan, and when the water began to steam, crack! He broke the eggshell and tried to pour its contents into the pan. But instead of egg white and egg yolk came a very cheerful and refined chick, who bowed handsomely as he said, "1,000 thanks, Sir Pinocchio, for having saved me the trouble of breaking the shell myself. Farewell, take care, and all my best to your family." With those words, he stretched out his wings and flew through the open window, disappearing from view. The poor puppet stood there as if bewitched, eyes wide, mouth agape, and half an eggshell in each hand. When the shock wore off, he began to weep and wail and stamp his feet on the ground in despair. Through his tears he said, "So the trucking cricket was right. If I hadn't run away, and if my daddy were here, I wouldn't be dying of hunger now. Oh, what a terrible sickness hunger is!" And because his belly was rumbling more than ever, and he had no idea how to quiet it, he decided to go out and pay a quick visit to the nearby village, in the hope of finding some charitable soul who might give him a bit of bread. Chapter 6. It turned out to be a truly hellish night. Thunder roared, lightning seemed to set fire to the sky, and a bitter, blustery wind furiously kicking up dust clouds and making the trees groan and creak across the countryside. Excuse me. Alexa, stop! There we go. Making the trees groan and creak across the countryside. Pinocchio was terribly afraid of thunder and lightning, but his hunger was greater than his fear, so he dashed out the door at top speed, and after 100 or so leaping strides, he reached the village, panting, his tongue hanging out like a hunting dog. But everything was dark and deserted. The shops were closed, the doors of houses were closed, the windows were closed. There wasn't so much as a dog on the street. It looked like the land of the dead. At this point, Pinocchio was overcome by despair and hunger, ran to the doorbell of a house, and began ringing it loudly, telling himself, "Surely someone will come." Indeed, a little old man in a nightcap did come, and he yelled angrily from his window, "What do you want at this hour?" "Would you be so kind as to give me a bit of bread?" "Don't move, I'll be right back," replied the old man, who assumed Pinocchio was one of those annoying miscreants who get their kicks by ringing the doorbells of decent folk, just to prevent them from getting a good night's sleep. After half a minute, the window opened again, and the same little old man shouted, "Stand below me and hold out your hat." Pinocchio took off his raggedy hat, but when he held it out, a basin full of water drenched him from head to toe, as if he had been a pot of wilting geraniums. He went back home looking like a drowned rat, worn out from fatigue and hunger, and since he no longer had the strength to stand, he sat down resting his soaked and muddy feet on the brazier still full of live coals. He fell asleep, and as he slept, his wooden feet caught fire and slowly burnt away until they were nothing but ash. Pinocchio slept through all that, snoring as if they were someone else's feet. Finally, he awoke at dawn when someone knocked at the door. "Who is it?" he asked, yawning and rubbing his hands together. "It's me," a voice replied. That was the voice of Geppetto. Chapter 7. If it were holy water poured on him, I'm sure Pinocchio would wither and vanish. Maybe, but he's not possessed, Matt. The wood's just magic. And in fairy tale, inanimate objects can be magic because fairy tales, magic. So he's not possessed. Anyway, Chapter 7. Poor Pinocchio. He was still half asleep and hadn't yet noticed that his feet had burnt right off. That's why, when he heard his father's voice, he leapt off his stool to run and unbolt the door. Instead, he lurched this way and that, and then he tumbled headlong to the ground. When he hit the floor, he made the same sound that a sack of wooden spoons might make if dropped off a tall building. Meanwhile, Geppetto was shouting, "Open up!" "I can't, Daddy," replied the puppet as he wept and flailed. "Why can't you?" "Because my feet got eaten." "And who ate them?" "The cat," said Pinocchio, noticing that the cat was amusing itself by batting wood shavings with its forepaws. "Open up, I say," Geppetto said again, "or else I will get in and eat you myself." "I can't stand up, believe me." "Oh, poor me, poor me. I'll have to walk on my knees for the rest of my life." Thinking that all this whining was just another of the puppet's pranks, Geppetto decided to put a stop to it. He climbed the wall and went in through the window. He was ready to say and do certain things, but when he saw that his Pinocchio sprawled there on the ground really had lost his feet, his heart melted. He took him in his arms at once and began kissing and stroking him and whispering 1,000 tender words and sobbing, and as shiny tears ran down his cheeks, he said, "My darling Pinocchio, how in the world did you burn your feet off?" "I don't know, Daddy, but it was sure a hellish night, and I'll remember it for the rest of my days. It was thundering and lightning, and I was famished, and then the talking cricket said to me, 'Serves you right, you've been naughty, you deserve it.' And I said, 'Watch out, Cricket.' And then he said, 'You're a puppet and a blockhead.' And I threw a wooden mallet at him, and he died, but it was his fault because I didn't want to kill him. The proof being that I had put a little skillet on the live coals of the brazier. But the chick flew out and said, 'Farewell and all my best to your family.' And I was getting hungrier and hungrier, which is why that little old man in a nightcap leaned out the window and said, 'Stand below me and hold out your hat.' And I got a basin full of water on my head, because there's no shame in asking for a piece of bread, right? And I came straight home, and since I was still famished, I put my feet on the brazier to dry them. And then when you came home, I found them all burnt, and meanwhile I'm still hungry, and I no longer have feet. Wah, 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 wah." Yeah, Pinocchio is extremely annoying. It's also hard to do a childly annoying voice. Luckily, I got orange juice in my mug. And poor Pinocchio began to cry and squawk so loudly that people could hear him 5 kilometers away. Of all this... The voice is so cute. Oh, please, no. Pinocchio is annoying and terrible. He's a literal brat in this story. Of all this jumbled talk, Geppetto only stood one thing, that the puppet was dying of hunger. So he took 3 pears from his pocket and handed them over, saying, "These 3 pears were my breakfast, but I happily give them to you. Eat them, and it may do you good." "If you want me to eat them, please peel them for me first." "Peel them?" replied Geppetto, amazed. "I never would have guessed, my boy, that you had such a finicky and fastidious palate. That's bad. In this world, even as children, we have to learn to eat anything and everything, and to like it, because we never know what lies in store for us. Strange things happen." He's, as I claim, a demon puppet. He's not a demon, Matt. He's just magic. He's the wood he's made from is magic, and he's just a brat. He's being a kid because little kids are brats because they don't know everything about the world because they're kids. All right. Okay. You're no doubt right, said Pinocchio, but I would never eat a piece of unpeeled fruit. I can't stand the peels. And so that good man Geppetto pulled out a knife and, armed with great patience, peeled the 3 pears and placed all the peels on the corner of the table. Pinocchio ate the first pear in 2 bites and was about to throw away the core when Geppetto grabbed his arm and said, "Don't throw it away. You never know what might come handy in this world." "But I would certainly never eat the core," shouted the puppet, recoiling like a viper. "Who knows? Strange things happen," said Geppetto again calmly. And so it was that 3 cores, instead of being thrown out the window, were placed in the corner of the table along with the peels. Having eaten, or to put it a better way, devoured the 3 pears, Pinocchio yawned widely and said with a whine, "I'm still hungry." "But I have nothing more to give you, my boy." "Nothing? Nothing at all?" "All I could offer you would be these peels and cores from the pears." "Oh, all right," said Pinocchio. "If there's nothing else, I'll eat 1 peel." He began to chew. At first he grimaced a little, but then he quickly wolfed down all the peels, and after the peels, the cores as well. And when he had polished it all off, he patted his belly with satisfaction and cheerfully said, "Now I feel better." "So you see," observed Geppetto, "I was right when I told you that one shouldn't be too dainty and delicate about food. My dear, we never know what this world has in store for us. Strange things happen." We're almost done. Just a few more chapters. Chapter 8. No sooner had the puppet satisfied his hunger than he began grousing and crying because he wanted a pair of new feet. But Geppetto, as punishment for his pranks, let him cry in despair for half a day, then said, "Why should I make you new feet? So I can see you run away from home again?" "I promise," said the sobbing puppet, "that from now on I'll be good." "That's what all children say," replied Geppetto, "when they're trying to get something." "But I'm not like other children. I'm better than the rest, and I always tell the truth. I promise you, Daddy, that I'll learn a trade and that I'll be the staff and comfort of your old age." Geppetto was trying to look severe, but his eyes brimmed with tears and his heart swelled with compassion at seeing his poor Pinocchio in such a pitiful state. Without another word, he took up his tools of trade, and along with 2 pieces of seasoned wood, he set to work in great earnest. In less than an hour, the 2 little feet were finished, and they were as nimble, lean, and sinewy as if they had been fashioned by a brilliant artist. Geppetto then told the puppet, "Close your eyes and go to sleep." And so Pinocchio closed his eyes and pretended to sleep. Meanwhile, Geppetto stuck the new feet in place with some glue he had melted in an eggshell, and he stuck them on so well that you couldn't even see the joint. As soon as the puppet realized the feet were on, he jumped down from the table where he had been lying and began skipping and capering about the room, as if driven crazy by so much happiness. "To repay you for everything you've done for me," said Pinocchio to his daddy, "I want to go to school right away." "Good boy. But before I can go to school, I need clothes." Geppetto, who was poor and didn't have so much as a penny in his pocket, fashioned a humble outfit out of flowered paper, and a pair of shoes out of tree bark, and a new cap out of breadcrumbs. Pinocchio ran to look at himself in a basin full of water, and he was so pleased with what he saw, he began strutting like a peacock, saying, "I look like a real gentleman." "It's true," said Geppetto, "because it isn't fine clothes, you must remember, that make a gentleman. It's clean clothes." "By the way," continued the puppet, "there's one more thing I need before I can go to school. In fact, the best and most important thing of all." "What's that?" "I need a spelling book." "You're right, but how can we get one?" "Simple. We go to a bookseller and buy one." "What about money?" "I don't have any." "Me neither," added the kind old man, growing sad. And Pinocchio, though he was a very cheerful boy, grew sad, too, because poverty, if it's true poverty, is understood by everyone, even children. "Don't worry," shouted Geppetto, suddenly springing to his feet. He put on his old fustian coat, all patches and darnings, and ran out the door. He soon returned, and when he came to the door, he had his son's spelling book in his hands, but no coat. The poor man was in his shirt sleeves, though it was snowing outside. "Where's your coat, Daddy?" "I sold it." "Why'd you sell it?" "Because I was too hot." Pinocchio quickly grasped what his answer meant, and he couldn't resist the good-hearted impulse to throw his arms around Geppetto's neck and begin covering his face with kisses. Because that's what parents do. That's what good parents do. Well, yeah, that's what parents do. Oh, hang on. Oh, nope, she's not behind the laptop. That was Cosmic, in case you heard. I'll be right back. I'm coming. Oh. Oh, you were outside the door. Well, yes, you were. The door's open now, so there you go. Sorry about that. Cosmic wanted it in my bedroom door was shut. Cosmic's my new kitten. Hi. Anyway. Chapter 9. As soon as it had stopped snowing, Pinocchio, with his nifty new spelling book tucked under his arm, set out down on the road to school. I'm reading the story of Pinocchio. That's what I'm doing. Well, yes, I am. You're welcome to listen. New spelling book tucked under his arm, set down on the road to school. Along the way, his little brain dreamt up 1,000 things, 1,000 castles in the air, each more lovely than the last. Conversing with himself, he said, "Today at school, I'll quickly learn to read. Then tomorrow, I'll learn to write. And the day after tomorrow, I'll learn my numbers. Then, with all that knowledge, I'll make a lot of money. And with the first money that comes into my hands, I'll buy my daddy a fine wool coat." But what am I saying? Wool. I'll buy him a coat made of silver and gold, with diamond buttons, and that poor man truly deserves it, because, after all, in order to buy me books and send me to school, he's going around in his shirt sleeves, in this cold. There are some sacrifices only a father would make. In the midst of all this emotional talk, he thought he heard in the distance the music of fifes and the beats of big drums. Dee-dee-dee-dee, dee-dee-dee-dee, dum, 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 dum. He stopped to listen. Those sounds came from the end of the long road that led to a tiny little village constructed by the seaside. What could that music be? It's too bad I have to go to school. Otherwise... And there he stood uncertain. One thing was sure. He had to do something. Either go to school or listen to the fifes. Today I'll go hear the fifes. Tomorrow I'll go to school. There's always time for school, the rascal finally said, shrugging his shoulders. Wasting no time, he headed down the side road and soon was running at top speed. The more he ran, the clearer he heard the sound of the fifes and the thumps of the big drum. Dee-dee-dee-dee-dee, 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 dum, 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 dum. Suddenly he found himself in the middle of a square, packed with people. They were conversing around a big wooden booth, covered with canvas that was painted with 1,000 colors. Turning to a little local boy, Pinocchio asked, "What is that booth?" "It's written on that poster. Read it and you'll know." "I'd gladly read it, but it just so happens that I can't read today." "Bravo, dummy! I'll read it to you. For your information, those fire-red letters on the poster say, 'Great Puppet Show.'" "How long did the show start?" "It's starting now." "And how much does it cost to get in?" 20 cents. Pinocchio, in a fever of curiosity, lost all self-control and shamelessly asked the boy, "Would you loan me 20 cents until tomorrow?" "I'd gladly give them to you," said the boy, mocking him, "but it just so happens that I can't today." "I'd sell you my jacket for 20 cents, the puppet said to the boy. "What am I going to do with a jacket made of flowery paper? If I got rained on, I'd never get it off." You want to buy my shoes? They'd be good for lighting fires. How much will you give me for my hat? Now that would be a bargain! A breadcrumb hat! Maybe the mice would come and eat it off my head. Pinocchio was on pins and needles. He was just about to make one last offer, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. He hemmed and hawed, he shilly-shallied, he agonized. At last he said, "Would you give me 20 cents for this new spelling book?" "I'm just a child, and I don't buy things from other children," replied his little interlocutor, who had more sense than Pinocchio did. "For 20 cents I'll buy that spelling book," cried a rag picker who happened to be listening to this conversation. The book was sold right then and there, and to think that poor Geppetto was sitting at home and shivering in his shirt sleeves from the cold just so his son could have a spelling book. Chapter 10.
Graphic novels, which
Oh, Cosmic left. Just shutting the door so that way my brother doesn't bleed into the live stream. Terribly sorry for the technical difficulties. Chapter 10. When Pinocchio entered the puppet theater, something happened there that triggered a small revolution. It's important to understand that the curtain had been raised and the play had already begun. On stage, Harlequin and Punicello were already quarreling with each other, as usual, and threatening at any moment to exchange a barrage of slaps and blows. The audience was riveted, and they laughed till their bellies ached at the bickering of those two puppets, who gesticulated and traded insults so realistically that they truly appeared to be two thinking beings, two persons of this world. Then all of a sudden, out of the blue, Harlequin stopped acting, turned toward the audience, pointed toward someone in the back of the pit, and started yelling in dramatic tones. "Good heavens! Do I dream, or am I awake? Yet surely I see there in the back, it's Pinocchio!" It truly is Pinocchio," shouted Punicello. "It's really him," squeals Miss Rosaura, peeping out from the back of the stage. "It's Pinocchio! It's Pinocchio!" All the puppets scream in unison, leaping up from the wings. "It's Pinocchio! It's our brother Pinocchio! Long live Pinocchio!" "Pinocchio, come up here where I am!" shouted Harlequin. "Come throw yourselves into the arms of your wooden brothers!" Because again, magic, fairy tale. And Italian fairy tales can kind of be bat guano crazy. I actually got a whole book on Italian fairy tales in my library. So, at this affectionate invitation, Pinocchio leaps from the back of the pit into the expensive seats, then jumps again from the expensive seats onto the orchestra conductor's head, and then springs from there onto the stage. You can't imagine all the hugging and embracing, the friendly pinches, and then the sincere headbutts of brotherhood that Pinocchio received amid this mayhem from the actors and actresses of that Plant Kingdom troupe. It was a heartwarming spectacle, no doubt, but the audience, seeing that the play had ground to a halt, grew impatient, began to shout, "We want the play! We want the play!" They were wasting their breath because the puppets, instead of going on with the show, redoubled their rumpus and fuss, hoisting Pinocchio onto their shoulders and carrying him triumphantly into the footlights. Excuse me. It was then that the puppet master came out, an enormous man, and so ugly that the mere sight of him was frightening. His foul beard was as black as an inkblot, and so long that it had dragged to the ground. Let's just say he stepped on it when he walked. His mouth was as wide as an oven, and his eyes were like lanterns, whose flames shined through panes of red glass, and his hands were cracking a big whip made of snakes and foxtails braided together. At the unexpected appearance of the puppet master, the crowd fell silent, holding its breath. You could have heard a pin drop. Those poor puppets, male and female alike, trembled like so many leaves. "Why are you causing such a commotion in my theater?" the puppet master asked Pinocchio, booming like an ogre with a bad cold. "Believe me, kind sir, it wasn't my fault." "That's enough out of you. We'll settle this business tonight." Indeed, as soon as the play was finished, the puppet master went into the kitchen, where he was fixing himself a nice big ram for dinner. It turned slowly on a spit over the fire, but since he didn't have enough wood to finish browning it, he called in Harlequin and Punicello and said, "Fetch me that puppet. You'll find him hanging on a nail. I think he's made of good dry wood, and I'm sure that if I toss him on the fire, it will flare up nicely and finish the roasting." At first, Harlequin and Punchinello hesitated, but then, afraid of incurring their owner's wrath, they obeyed. They soon returned to the kitchen, carrying poor Pinocchio, who was wriggling like an eel out of water, screaming helplessly, "Oh, save me, Daddy! I don't want to die! No, I don't want to die!" Chapter 11. We're almost done. I won't deny it. Fire Eater, this was the puppet master's name, did indeed look scary, with that foul black beard of his that covered his chest and legs like an apron, but deep down, he really wasn't a bad man. In fact, when he saw poor Pinocchio brought before him, struggling every which way and howling, "I don't want to die! I don't want to die!" he was immediately moved to pity. He resisted the feeling for quite some time, but finally he could no longer help himself. He let out a resounding sneeze. Before that sneeze, Harlequin had looked hopelessly sad and was hunched over like a weeping willow. But after it, his face lit up. Leaning toward Pinocchio, he whispered, "Good news, brother. The puppet master sneezed, and that means he feels sorry for you, so you'll be okay now." It's important to know that while most people cry when they feel sorry for someone, or at least make a show of wiping their eyes, Fire Eater was in the habit, when deeply moved, of sneezing. It was as good a way as any to show other people what he felt in his heart. After sneezing, the puppet master, still grumpy, yelled at Pinocchio, "Stop crying! Your wailing is giving me a bellyache, causing me such cramps. It's almost achoo! Achoo!" "Bless you," said Pinocchio. "Thank you," said Fire Eater. "And your father and mother, are they still alive?" "My daddy is. I never knew my mother." "I can only imagine what a blow it would be to your old father if I had thrown you onto those burning coals. That poor old man. I feel sorry. Achoo! Achoo! Achoo!" "Bless you," said Pinocchio. "Thank you. On the other hand, you should feel sorry for me too, since as you see I don't have enough wood to finish roasting the ram. The fact is, you really would have come in handy right now, but I have already taken pity on you, so that's that. Instead, I'll put on one of the puppets from my troupe onto the coals beneath that spit. Oh, guards!" At his commands, 2 wooden guards appeared at once. Both were very tall and very thin, with Napoleon hats on their heads and unsheathed swords in their hands. Then the puppet master, his voice hoarse, said to them, "Fetch me Harlequin, there, tie him up good, we'll throw him onto that fire. I want my ram well roasted." Just imagine how poor Harlequin felt. So frightened was he that his knees buckled and he fell forward onto the ground. At this heartrending sight, Pinocchio threw himself at the puppet master's feet, weeping copiously and bathing that long beard in his tears. He began to speak in pleading tones. "Have mercy, kind sir." "There are no sirs here," growled the puppet master. "Have mercy, noble knight." "There are no knights here." "Have mercy, my lord." "There are no lords here." "Have mercy, your excellency." Hearing himself called excellency, the puppet master quickly pursed his lips, and, having suddenly become gentler and more agreeable, said to Pinocchio, "Well then, what is it you want from me?" "I implore you to have mercy on poor Harlequin." "This is no time for mercy. If I save you, it means I have to put him on the fire because I want that ram of mine to be well roasted." "In that case," cried Pinocchio proudly, standing and throwing off his bread cab crumb, "in that case, I know what I must do. Come, guards, tie me up and throw me on into those flames. No, it isn't fair for poor Harlequin, my true friend, to die in my place." At these words, pronounced loudly and heroically, every puppet in the room burst into tears. Even the guards, though made of wood, cried like a pair of newborn lambs. Fire Eater at first remained as hard and firm as a block of ice, but then little by little he too began melting and sneezing. After sneezing 4 or 5 times, he opened his arms warmly to Pinocchio and said, "You are a marvelously good boy. Come here and give me a kiss." Pinocchio ran over to the puppet master, clambered like a squirrel up his beard, and planted a big kiss on the tip of his nose. "Then mercy is granted?" asked poor Harlequin in a feeble voice the others could barely hear. "Mercy is granted," replied Fire Eater, and then sighing and shaking his head, he added, "That's that! Tonight I'll have to make do with half raw mutton, but beware, next time it will be someone else's turn." Hearing that mercy had been granted, the puppets all ran to the stage, lit the lamps and chandeliers as if for a gala performance, and began to leap and dance about. When dawn arrived, they were dancing still. Chapter 12. And that's where we will end the story for now. Part 2 will consist of chapters 12 to 23. So that's that. And there go the speakers again. It's suddenly here. There you go. But thank you for those who came and for those who stayed. I hope you guys enjoyed the first part of Pinocchio's story. As you can see, there are clear differences from the animated film and from the book. For examples, both characters are flawed, but they're relatable characters. It's just the way that they're flawed that makes them different. For example, Pinocchio in the animated film is very sweet, very naive, but still well-meaning. And in the book Pinocchio is horrible and terrible. He literally murdered Jiminy Cricket. He killed the cricket. But yeah, that's that. I also found it interesting that all the puppets recognized Pinocchio in the book, and that they call him their brother. How do they know him? How are they related? We don't know. It's never explained, but there's something kind of interesting about that. I mean, I guess the saying goes, puppets of the same strings hang together? I guess. I don't know. But yeah, that was part 1 of the story. Thank you so much for coming, and next up I will be reading part 2 of the story, which will be from chapters 12 to 23, and then part 3 will consist of 23 to 36. So it will consist of those chapters. There we go. Another alarm went off. But yeah, thank you so much for coming. And yeah, I'll see you all in the next one. Bye!